Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. I'm Cade Kennedy alongside Tyler Riggs, and today we're looking at the SEC tier list that we've decided to come up with for this season. If you've watched the other tier list videos, you know the spiel by now, but we are starting with the number one team in the preseason poll, working our way all the way down to 16, and of course we have our tier lists here. We have the elite tier, which is 11 to 12 wins. Now, keep in mind, these are regular season wins, not counting playoffs, not counting bowl games or anything like that. Great, which is 9 to 10 wins. Good is 7 to 8. Average is 5 to 6. Bad is 3 to 4. And horrible, winless to only a 2-win season.
Yeah, at the bottom.
At the absolute bottom. But before we get into that, as always, we encourage you, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, all those good things, because it might not seem like a whole lot, just, a few seconds of your time. It does mean a lot to us, and we do sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, join in on the conversation. Let us know if the tier list sucked. Maybe you disagree somewhere. Maybe, hey, you've got some same but different thoughts, if you will. So give us a shout. Let us know. We might talk about it on an episode.
Absolutely. And so that starts us with the number one team in the SEC, at least preseason ranking-wise. That is Georgia. 9th year for Kirby Smart. Man, does time fly. My goodness. Last year, Georgia 13-1, 8-0 in the SEC, went to the SEC championship game, lost to Alabama, but then got the consolation prize of all consolation prizes, a 63-3 smackdown over Florida State. Poor Florida State.
A beating so bad it hung over into week 0. Wow.
Absolutely disgusting there. Just absolutely destroying them. But you look at Georgia, you look at the key players. I could list everybody. I really could. We got Carson Beck, good quarterback, turning into a great quarterback. Now he's a contender for the Heisman this year. You got Trevor Etienne on the running back slot there. You've got a great offensive line behind him. Dominic Lovett at wide receiver, Oscar Delp at tight end. And, it's a Kirby Smart Georgia team. You know they're going to have good defenders. Nazir Stackhouse on the D-line, Michael Williams at linebacker, Malachi Starks, another defensive back. They have just about every position you could think of locked down on both sides of the ball. And you look at Georgia's schedule. You start the year with Clemson. You play that game in Atlanta. Basically a home game if you think about it.
Yep.
Technically a neutral site game. But September 28th is the big one. You go to Alabama. That is going to be the monumental game of the season there. And then only a few weeks later, you have another giant one playing Texas in DKR in Austin on October 19th. You got one more big road game, November 9th. Going to Oxford to play Ole Miss. Tennessee at home the next week. UMass, fun cupcake week game there. And then Georgia Tech on Black Friday to end the year, which Georgia Tech obviously beating Florida State.
Some might say the ACC favorite.
Yeah, some might say, which we'll talk about that in the ACC video. But, the joy of recording this after week 0 happens. So now that game is a little bit bigger. But you look at Georgia this season, and, last year we made the bold claim that no one's probably going to beat Georgia in the regular season. If they lose, it would be in the postseason. That's exactly what happened. This year, the schedule looks a lot more difficult, though. You had those big road games, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss. Tennessee will be a little bit difficult, just mainly placement right after that Ole Miss game. There's some pitfalls there for Georgia. It's just, will they fall in them? They haven't been the last few years. That's why they've been winning national championships.
Yeah, that's the big question. Has Kirby Smart built himself such a program at this point to where they get the Alabama benefit of the doubt, where you say, doesn't matter who's on the schedule, Georgia no matter what, right? Alabama for a time kind of felt like that. We'll see how Kalen DeBoer's era kicks off this season, because there is holes, right? As typical with Georgia team, you lose a lot of talent to NFL. They've lost some to the portal, and probably the biggest question marks is that, can ETN be a difference maker at running back? You lost Brock Bauer, obviously, NFL, Lad McConkey. Those are not guys you just replace overnight, but with recruiting classes Georgia's pulled in, you expect next man up. Next guy's the star. That's how it goes. Cade, I'm feeling a little questionable, and I think part of it comes down to I don't know if Carson – I know this sounds wild to say considering what happened last season. Is Carson Beck really that guy? Because if there's a time for him to prove it, it is this season. Schedule's tough. They're the prohibitive favorite still. Is he the guy that is truly the one that's going to say, okay, my time to lead in a similar fashion that, Sam Bennett was able to do during his time? Can Carson Beck be that guy? I'm not so confident. I think elite tier, I'm about great and a half. I'm thinking 10, 11 wins. I do think they get beat in the regular season. Is it once? Is it twice? Where does that land them in the SEC?
And that's where I feel with Georgia. Georgia, we're going to learn a lot about them, obviously, when they play Clemson.
Sure.
That's, a great right out of the gate. Clemson, good defensive team. How does Georgia match up against them? I think Georgia's just the more talented team. They win that game no matter what. The one that really just is crazy to me is that Alabama game. Because we get to find out, did Georgia just have a Nick Saban problem, or is it just Alabama in general?
Right.
If they can win that game, you could probably mark Ole Miss as a win as well. And then your big one becomes Texas. But I feel like the way the schedule's built this year, they're dropping at least one of those three. They might even drop two. But Georgia has entered that tier, for me at least, that you believe in Georgia until they lose a game.
And that's fair.
And I think that they deserve to be in the elite tier, even if, they might go 10-2 for all we know. But I think they've kind of started to earn that Alabama treatment as they are the best team in the SEC for the last few years. Until proven otherwise, until I see it with my own eyes, they're in that elite tier as an 11-win team.
I can see that. I can agree with that.
But that will move us on to, surprisingly, usually you're expecting to see Alabama in the top two. With the beauty of conference realignment, that does not happen this year. Instead, it's Texas.
By a slim margin now, one could argue with the troubles in the running back room due to the preseason injuries, Alabama maybe should now be ahead of Texas technically, but the stuff was decided on, obviously, these media polls before those injuries. Texas, Cade, run down that schedule. They're kind of a weird one, I think, in my eyes. We'll get to it here.
Well, Texas is just not all over the place. You get some nice groupings here and there, but Colorado State to start the year, you get the big game at Michigan September 7th. That is the monumental big noon game. A few weeks off, UTSA is no slouch by any means, but still a game you should just be able to out-talent them no matter what. Same with Louisiana Monroe. Mississippi State's a little bit interesting. You play against the Jeff Lebby team, who was the offense coordinator at Oklahoma last year, was able to script up a few good game plan decisions there, able to get some good calls in that allowed Oklahoma to beat Texas. You get the bye week, and then it's Red River time. Here's the problem with their schedule, though. This is the big 1-2 punch of the whole year. After Oklahoma, it's Georgia the next week. And you want to talk about just a big week for the city of Austin. You have that game going on. F1's going to be there the exact same week. That's just a big week for Austin in general. But after that, the schedule really lightens up in terms of opponents, but not in terms of what it really means. Because you still have at Arkansas. That is a giant game for Arkansas. That is old Southwest Conference rivalry. And then we end the year with the Lone Star Showdown returning. I am looking forward to that almost more than I am as an OU fan looking forward to OU LSU.
No, that's
because that is, it's been years since Justin Tucker told the Aggies goodbye. And now the Aggies get to be the ones to welcome him back in College Station as, okay, you kicked us out of the Big 12. Now we're going to welcome you into the SEC. That is going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be the most watched game that week because Ohio State, Michigan's right there, and that blows usually everything out of the water. But that is going to be a lot of fun. And that deserves to be a night game. I know it's listed right now as anywhere between 3:30 and 8 Eastern. That demands prime time. It's just that type of game. When you don't see your rival for 13 years, it's a crazy deal. And I'm excited to see how wild that place gets. Tickets for that game now are already in the $500 range.
Yeah.
Some places wanting $1,000 for really, really good seats. That will be fun.
It will. And I give Texas this. We run down that schedule and say, this isn't necessarily the easiest. Texas proved last year they could be the hunted and survive that, right? You beat Bama early season, survive that one, and you lose the Red River game, but you come back and you make the playoff. And you were right there competitive in the playoffs. So I think Quinn Ewers has proved enough to say, okay, he's that guy. The biggest thing is, how does their balance now be affected offensively, knowing of the injuries in the running back room? Because those are not just players that you replace with a couple walk-ons. Preseason, you go, okay, Quinn Ewers doesn't necessarily have to be the hero. Now there's situations where he might have to be more that hero. Can he rise to that challenge? Defense also lost a lot. Lost a lot of good talent in the NFL. You expect with recruiting classes they pulled in, similar to what we talked about with Georgia. All right, it's reload, and you go forward. The next man's up, the next star, right? How will that shake out? Dare I say, I know it's weird saying this, despite them being a high rank, are there more question marks this season for Texas than there were maybe last season, right? I know that sounds weird, but that's where I'm kind of at. Can they repeat that success? Do we trust that Texas is indeed back? Are the memes finally done? Are they buried? Or does that kind of rear its head a little bit and Texas starts having some flashbacks to the dark times they experienced a few years back?
Well, see, it's interesting to me that you bring that up because the is Texas back question, you could ask 5 different people and get 5 different answers.
Right.
To some people, it's winning the Big 12. To some people, it's winning the Big 12 and making a playoff game. To some people, it's winning a playoff game. I think the main thing to me last year was showing consistency.
Yeah.
You look at it's now 4th year for Steve Sarkisian. Every year they've gotten better. It was only a few years ago they were still losing to Kansas. Now they go to a playoff game. Quinn Ewers, that was the one thing I wanted to see from him last year. I wanted to see if he was the guy. He played like the guy. Even when he was injured, Texas as a unit, offense and defense, everybody stepping up, even Bert Auburn as well. Great hair, by the way, for a kicker. You got to love it. But Texas has the talent. Now, obviously, the C.J. Baxter injury is going to be brutal for them, and that running back room will look like a bit of a mess. But they've still got good defensive players. They've still got Isaiah Bond, who's going to be an amazing receiver to watch. I think even with all that said, I think Texas wins at Michigan earlier in the year. I think some of that might be more of a Michigan thing than it is a Texas thing.
Fair enough.
Michigan, offense, we have yet to be determined what they're going to do.
Cloud of an NCAA investigation maybe over their head.
Yeah, maybe. The big one is the split because I think you beat one of Oklahoma or Georgia. You don't win both. I don't think you lose both. I think you win one of those games and you lose one of those. You win one, you lose one. The problem to me is that back part of the schedule because in theory it looks laughably easy. Florida,
compared to the front.
Yeah, compared to the front. Florida, who's way down. Arkansas, who's way down. Kentucky, who is usually middle of the pack, can punch above their weight.
But that Texas is better on paper.
Yeah, Texas is better on paper. And then A&M's the big one you look forward to. You can't overlook anyone. You can't start thinking about, oh, man, it's going to be great to see Arkansas and A&M on the road again because that's how you get beat by Florida or Kentucky. In paper, or on paper, I should say, not in paper. We don't play games on paper. Or on paper, to be fair. I think Texas, talent-wise, puts them in elite tier.
Oof.
I think it really does.
Oof.
The only problem I have, though, is now with that running back room. When Ewers, the last 2 years he's had injury issues, usually through no fault of his own. You get a bad hit here and there. That happens. If he goes down again, depending on where that is, if he goes down before Oklahoma and Georgia, then that scenario of, okay, they can go 10-2, that becomes a problem. Then, then we get the whole Arch Manning discussion, and that becomes an entire new can of worms.
Well, and that's the one thing that they do have to their credit. I do think when you look at a guy like Arch Manning, he's patient. He's taken his time in the weight room, physically gotten stronger. Compared to previous years, Texas hadn't had that depth in the quarterback room. Heck, most of the time before years, they were looking at the quarterbacks going, can somebody step up and actually be that guy? Now you've got a guy in Arch Manning that I think, given an opportunity, could easily step in and do a good enough job to lead them to a win. Will he necessarily be as good as Ewers? No, I don't think right away. But we know he's got the pedigree. And he's definitely, if you look at him, improved himself physically enough to be ready for SEC football over the last year. So I'm not as worried, as crazy as it sounds. I'm more worried about the running back injuries than I would have been if Quinn Ewers got injured.
Yeah, and that's kind of the situation I'm in because it's in any game, you're going to have to run the ball to win. It's just a facet of life.
And in the SEC, you can't be one-dimensional. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely. However, I think that Texas, with the talent they still have, and the fact that they've earned the benefit of the doubt for me, not only for winning the Big 12, but for not immediately folding in the playoff game. Well, let's remind us, they were in that game with Washington until the very end, which is something that, even though being a biased OU fan, I wanted to see them get blown and, pounded into the sand as much as possible. They did not, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. They fought back and fought back and fought back and would never surrender. And I think Steve Sarkisian's been a really good guy about that. He's been really great for Texas, as much as it pains me to say that. I think Texas, being generous to them for once, I will put them in the elite tier, on that borderline. I will put them on that borderline. And until proven otherwise, at least for now, that privilege can always be revoked, but I will be generous for them to now and put them in an 11-1 elite tier.
And I'm in the grade-ish, similar to where I was with Georgia, where it's probably in between 10 and 11. I truly think your SEC champ, if you will finish the regular season with at least one, if not two losses, just because such a tough conference, similar to what we've talked about with the Big Ten. It's just so deep, and it's good at the top. It's going to be hard to navigate through that completely, nearly undefeated.
Absolutely. I'm with you there. I think you're going to have at least an 11-1. 12-1 champ once the game is done. I think that's what we're going to be looking at. And it's crazy because now we get to team number 3, which is obviously Alabama. It's the Kalen DeBoer era. It is officially started. Alabama 12-2 last year, SEC champions, lost the Rose Bowl in overtime to Michigan. But they've got a lot coming back. They've still got a good offensive line. Jalen Milroe's going to be improved. You've got Justice Haynes at running back. You're going to have a lot of defensive talent. What a surprise. Alabama's still going to have a lot of talent with them. The only problem, which is weird saying this because usually, this makes a difference, but not as much as a lot of people are going to talk about this year. Nick Saban's not there, which is crazy, I know. He's been there since, I was 7 years old.
Right.
I can barely remember time before him being there. You look at Alabama's schedule. First 2 games should be easy. Western Kentucky when USF gave him problems last year in a game where Nick Saban proved a point by putting Ty Simpson out there. Now you get them in Tuscaloosa, should be an easier game. You should have Milroe starting that. You go to Wisconsin. You should beat Wisconsin. But it is, a crazier environment up there. Alabama's not used to going that far north. It's September. Weather won't be a factor. That argument can get thrown out. But then you have a bye, and then you get Georgia at home. That is your must-win if you want to be in the elite tier. That's a must-win game. But then a few weeks later, you go to Tennessee. You get Missouri at home the week after. Bye week at LSU. You go to Oklahoma. You get Oklahoma before the Iron Bowl. The way Alabama's schedule is built this year, they're going to lose a couple of games, I feel like. With just the nature of the beast, Nick Saban's not there anymore. Alabama will still be feared for being Alabama, but that kind of layer of, sometimes we call it plot armor, where it feels like, the perfect example, 4th and 31 last year at Auburn. That just felt like a game that, great, Alabama wins because they're Alabama.
Yeah.
They casually convert that and win the game. Those types of games will still happen. Alabama's not going to go away. But I think, a combination of 5 top 15 teams, a decent chunk of them on the road. Tennessee, keep in mind, they beat them the last time Alabama went to Knoxville. LSU beat them the last time they went to Baton Rouge. OU is going to be a crazy environment for Alabama coming to town. The Iron Bowl's the Iron Bowl. Granted, it's in Tuscaloosa this year. I think you drop probably to Georgia, and I think you at least lose one more of those 4. Alabama could easily be an elite tier, but I think just based on the schedule, you got to put them, I would say, probably a 10-2 team. I think they're easily great tier still.
I think that's a conservative estimate and probably the right one. The thing that intrigues me is that, to me, of those top 3, I think they're the dark horse to be the best overall team.
Yeah, and they very well could.
Simply because, from all indications in the offseason so far and through camp, I think Kalen DeBoer at his 180 style compared to Nick Saban, who is more iron-fisted, more Bill Belichickian in terms of how you would run the program, whereas DeBoer is more of a player's guy, a little bit more modern age, both very effective with their systems just in different ways. I think that breath of fresh air might take some of that pressure off of those Alabama guys. Because it's, you playing for that team, you walk in the doors, doesn't matter if you're 4 or 5 star, whatever, you're going to have to live up to a very high standard if you ever even want to be a contributor for a team like that, for a program that's built what Nick Saban and that group did, right? But I think DeBoer showed last year, obviously, with Washington that, hey, this style can work. We could compete with the best of them. And he did it with arguably less resources, far less resources than what he's had at Alabama. And the fact that they brought back what they brought back, especially Jalen Milroe, and been able to keep the recruiting side, at least for now, up, could lead to Bama, unfortunately for the rest of the college football world, just continuing to churn as they do.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. Like I said, I think some of it is just, having Georgia and Texas both be there. That's going to be a little bit weird to see. I think Alabama, just the schedule-wise of it, Kalen DeBoer, I don't know if he's seen a schedule quite like this. Obviously, Pac-12, SEC, just a little bit different.
Just a little.
A little bit different in terms of talent across the board. But I think Alabama, even if they go 10-2 this year,
you're
they'll
still
be
the
fine.
hunt. Yeah, you're still riding the hunt.
They did that a few years ago, where they'll have an 11-2 year. They played Michigan in the Capital One Bowl.
Right. And this year,
ago, things like that.
The 12 team, 10-2, probably puts you in a spot for an at-large.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I still think Alabama probably will be a playoff team. Some bizarre thing could happen if, that'd take a lot. And I don't think they're one of those teams that's almost too big to fail, it feels like, I guess is the best way to say it.
They're like corporate America,
yeah,
almost too big.
They're always going to be there. They are kind of inevitable in a way, it feels
They're the Walmart of college football.
If you want to interpret my statement as that, you could say that. But we're moving on to Ole Miss. Ole Miss, the 4th spot here, Lane Kiffin in his 5th year. Ole Miss 11-2 last year. Big deal there. 6 wins in conference play. Won the Peach Bowl. Beat Penn State 38-25. Lane Kiffin has got Jackson Dart back at quarterback, and he's got a lot of weapons, does Mr. Dart. Trey Harris, a wide receiver. Caden Prizecorn at tight end. You've got Ulysses Bentley at running back. Yes, losing Quinshon Judkins is going to hurt, but Ole Miss is still going to be a pretty good team. And when you look at their schedule, I want to run down the first 6 games here for you. And I want you to think about how much of a challenge this is to a team of what Ole Miss is supposed to be, at least on paper. Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, and South Carolina. They should easily be able to clear the 6-0 mark. At LSU, that suddenly we get a lot tougher. Bye week, you get Oklahoma at home. At Arkansas, Georgia, bye week, at Florida, Egg Bowl madness to end the year, as is tradition, as it should be. Now, they moved it off Thanksgiving Day, which I think was a mistake because I like watching that game on Thanksgiving. They moved it to Friday. I think they should move it back. But with LSU, Oklahoma, and Georgia, I feel like the Georgia game is probably going to be a loss. I think you split LSU and Oklahoma. So I think Ole Miss, it's supposed to be another really good year, one of their best teams they've assembled in a long time. I still think they're going to be great here. The potential for 10 wins is clearly there. Maybe even an 11th, you break some things their way. Maybe you beat LSU on the road. Maybe, you beat LSU and Oklahoma. If they beat Georgia, something's clearly we've crossed into the Lane Kiffin might actually be in control of the best team in the SEC, maybe timeline. And I don't know if that's a timeline people would be ready for.
Oh man, that might be the true end of the world. If that happens, we had the great scene on Rocky Top. You mentioned that Tennessee last time they hosted Alabama, beating them, and just that mass humanity in the middle of that. It could be a repeat of that, but with Lane Kiffin shirtless. That'd be insane. But no, they're a tough team to judge, I think, just because you look on paper and say, yeah, they bring back all this talent, but it's Ole Miss. They're not supposed to be consistently great, right? They're supposed to pop up, have a season, kind of fall back a little bit, pop up. But give credit to Lane. He's built a good program, and he's probably, of the SEC coaches, I would say, and not surprisingly to this, I think, adapting the quickest to the NIL era, right, where he's up front with guys. Says, hey, you come here, we'll give you this much, we'll give you this opportunity. You don't have to stay through the rest of your career. I don't expect that, but this is what I want to do this season. right? And he could still be on the recruiting trail, sell some of his top prospects that he wants to come in and build with, say, hey, you're a cornerstone piece, should you choose to accept that challenge, right? So he's a good players coach and also speaks to where, for a player, they know with him, he's not going to BS them. The dude's been through the ringer. He can say, look, I've been at the top of college football. I've been at the lowest point of college football. I've been through this. Ride with me, and we're going to get this done. So he's, in his older years, has gained, I think, some good wisdom compared to what he was younger in his career, and has somehow been molded into maybe the perfect new age SEC coach. Who would have thought?
He might be, and as we'll kind of get into more and more teams that we go through, I think it's just kind of interesting to see the evolution of the SEC, where it was 10 years ago to where it is now, especially as more of this list unfolds, which I think eventually you'll start to disagree with me on, and where I think we'll have contrasting views on where the SEC is at least this year.
I know one team we're going to have.
Yeah, one team we're going to disagree on probably. But LSU, I don't think is going to be that team. Brian Kelly in his third year, 10-3 last year with a Heisman Trophy winner, some guy named Jaden Daniels. He was
all right.
He's pretty good.
He's
He had
okay.
a game where he ran for nearly 200 yards. It was pretty good. But they've still got good team players on this team. Of course, there's some guy named Harold Perkins. He's kind of a monster on defense. He is a lot of fun to watch. You got Major Burns, great all-team name.
Great all-team
Good
name.
defensive back as well. Still going to have some weapons like Kyron Lacey, Mason Taylor on the offensive side of the ball. But LSU's schedule gets going immediately. You get USC game 1 in Vegas. After that, really cools off. I mean, Nicholls, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama. If you beat Southern Cal, you're rolling 5-0 into the Ole Miss game. Then you get Arkansas at Texas A&M. Alabama at home is going to be the massive one, of course. At Florida, your fun game with Vandy, and then Oklahoma at home to end the year. That's going to be a bit tougher of a stretch, I think. But, you kind of round up the games of Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. I think if you could split those, you can find yourself in a 10-win season pretty easily.
You can. And I think the big question for them is, okay, Garrett Nussmeier, right? Stuck it out, kind of waited, set his turn behind Daniels after some up and down, if you will, over the course of his career so far. Some highlight moments and some not so great moments. Can he now take the reins as a bit of a more mature quarterback? Doesn't have to be Jalen Daniels, doesn't have to be the Heisman winner, but can he be that guy that makes plays in the big moments? Because if he can, LSU, I think, is right there with Alabama in the sense that maybe they are the sneaky team to rise above a Georgia, Texas.
And to me, the sky really is the limit for LSU this year. If Nussmeier can be truly unlocked, Ole Miss is at home. Alabama's at home. Oklahoma's at home. Your only big road game is at Texas A&M of all of those three. And you only need to win one to get into the great tier. So LSU goes in the great tier. I think they can at least win one of those to get to a 9-win
I think
season.
9's fair.
I think 9, 10, they're around that borderline ballpark estimate. I think that is a pretty fair assessment that LSU will be pretty good once again. That's why they're top 5 in the SEC. Now, the other set of Tigers, Missouri, the other ones that have yellow, gold, whatever you want to call it in their color scheme, there are a lot of Tigers in the SEC. This is always the fun when you get convoluted here. This is also what happens when we're recording at 12:39 in the morning. I start running out of things to say. Missouri, talented team. What else can you say about them? Last year, 11-2. Eli Drinkwitz, it's his 5th year at Missouri. Doesn't feel like it. Feels like Missouri just kind of broke onto the scene last year. Oh, well, that's because they did. They were able to win the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State. They've still got some great talent, especially on offense. You got Brady Cook. You got Luther Burden III, who's going to be a phenomenal wide receiver. Missouri's schedule also happens to be one of the softest I've ever seen in the first few games. I mean, you get Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vandy at Texas A&M, UMass, and Auburn. Then you get Alabama on the road October 26th. You get Oklahoma at home November 9th. South Carolina, Mississippi State, both on the road, Arkansas at home. Some of that scheduling's through no fault of their own, getting Vandy and Auburn at home and things like that. Some of your easier-looking games. But my goodness, if you don't start 4-0 and then the bye, something has gone completely wrong because you're beating all four of those teams. You should, on paper, beat Texas A&M. A&M's a tough place to play. There's a very well chance.
4.5-point favorite according to Vegas right now.
Favorite. I know. A&M's a tough place to play. On paper, that's one of those games you think you can win. When we get there, we get there. UMass, Auburn, those are games you should win. That puts you at 6. Alabama, I think you lose. Oklahoma, to some people, that's a coin flip game. Missouri people seem pretty confident about that. Oklahoma people pretty confident they can win that game too. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch. That game right there. It's going to be truly fun. And then,
renewing an old Big 12 rivalry.
Yeah, the Big 8 battle for the, what do they call it, the Sooner Tiger Peace Pipe or whatever. No one's seen that trophy since the 80s probably, but if Wikipedia wants to count it as that, so good for them. Last 3 games of the year you should win: South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas. Those feel like trap games mainly because they are, because if the season goes like Missouri thinks it can, you're just trying to protect yourself at that point. But I think Missouri, with their schedule, you look at Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama, even if you lose all 3 of those, you're still winning 9 games in my opinion. I think you can at least win one of those 3. I'm going to put them in great tier. Not going to put them in elite tier. They very well could be. I could see where they beat Texas A&M. I could see even beating Oklahoma at home as a giant game. But I don't see them winning all 3. I think the most realistic scenario is 10-2.
So,
and now we get to the disagreement, I assume.
As I've alluded to, I think Missouri's overrated. Luther Burden is absolutely going to be a guy that's playing on Sundays. He's one of the best receivers in the country. He will be an elite talent in the NFL. I think the rest of the team is overblown. I don't see the defense there that is hyped up to be all elite. I remember when they had a good defense. Actually, one of their key contributors on defense I went to high school with, Kentrell Brothers, who's all SEC defensive end. They had the front 7. I don't think this front 7 is on that level. I think Brady Cook, who at times could be electric, can also be detrimental to winning football because he tries to make the big play too often. And, yes, the schedule does them a lot of good favors, but I could also see a scenario where Missouri enters that Texas A&M game. They're drinking their own Kool-Aid. They think they're going to go in and take care of the Aggies. Knock down quick. Texas A&M 2-touchdown win. They recover a little bit. Obviously, UMass shouldn't be anything. Auburn, we'll talk about them, probably not the best. Roll in, try to take on the Crimson Tide. Again, pegged down. You get beat by a couple of scores at least. All of a sudden, now you realize maybe we're in trouble here, trying not to let the chance at the SEC championship slip away. Well, you got to turn around and face Oklahoma. Yes, you're at home, but now you're reeling. OU's on the up and up. They've gone through some tough early games. They get you in a close one. Now you're sitting at 3 losses. Get to the back half of the season. Those road games at South Carolina, Mississippi State seem easy, should be easy, but Missouri trying to lick their wounds, thinks, we'll roll in here and get some easy wins. Maybe they slip up. I see a scenario where this is maybe an 8-win team. I see 9-3. I'm good in a half. Over under 8.5 wins for Missouri this year. That's where I'm putting them.
Well then. So, and we almost ended up being in the same place because, I could see 9-3 as kind of like the worst case scenario for them. This is a schedule they are built to win with. This is, a lot of Missouri people, this is their kind of golden team. This is their, if we're going to win the SEC or if we're going to make the playoffs and make a big run, this needs to be the year to do it. This is all the pieces we have. And I think their offense is going to be good enough to do it. Like you mentioned, the defense will be a slight concern there. Maybe might be more than a slight concern as the season continues to roll on. I think 10-2 is fair enough for them.
That's where we differ, though. I don't think they have 10 wins in them. That's what I'm implying here.
They did last year.
Yes, but last year you had divisions. Those divisions are gone. Teams are going to be just priming to say, hey, we got to be able to do what we can to be the best that we can because there's no divisions. So it's the SEC. Everything's on the line every week, right?
That is true.
I mean, South Carolina, Mississippi State late season, they say, hey, we're not going to go to the playoff or the SEC championship game, but let's ruin some people's days. That's might be the mentality. Arkansas, they've been Jekyll and Hyde, right? Where they might have a week where randomly they pop up and compete with you. So who knows what you might get of them. I feel Missouri might be drinking their Kool-Aid just a little too much right now.
Well, we'll have to see. That's all we can say. We'll have to see, and it's really all I got to that. I'm like, I don't know.
Don't know where you're going with
I just fundamentally disagree. I think Missouri, this is kind of their year. It's kind of been built up for it. I will believe the Tigers on this one. Both sets of Tigers in the great tier.
Okay.
We'll get to the third set in Auburn eventually. But first, we got to talk about Tennessee. Josh Heupel, his fourth year, Tennessee 9-4 last year. They're going to have some fun. James Pierce Jr. going to be a monster on the defensive line. Now, Tennessee's kind of in the interesting category because they've got a quarterback, Nico Iamaleava. Have fun trying to say that name. I don't even know if I just
say it
said
3 times fast.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. But you look at Tennessee's schedule, and you look at where Tennessee kind of is at. They're in the same boat as Missouri. They feel that this is their chance once again to have another breakout year. So their schedule it's not as favorable as Missouri's, obviously. You've got to play Alabama at home. You got to go to Georgia. You got to go to Oklahoma. You got NC State week 2 in Charlotte. But I think NC State's a winnable game. A lot of Tennessee people, a lot of national media people believe Oklahoma's a pretty winnable game. You get Arkansas and Florida before you get Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi State, UTEP, and Vandy to end the year. There's a lot of excitement for the Vols, and I think deservingly so.
I do think, though, that, as you mentioned, schedule maybe not quite as easy compared to what Missouri has. And the secret is, while I just trashed Missouri, I think on paper, Tennessee isn't as talented. I'm putting them in the good tier, more so on the 8-win bracket. I don't think they slipped to 5 losses. Probably good and a half, but I'd say 8 wins, solid, probably fair given some of those tough spots of the schedule.
See, I'll split NC State and Oklahoma. I'll be generous, give 1 win, 1 loss. Alabama, you lose. Georgia, you lose. You're not losing to Vandy. You're not losing to UTEP. You're beating Kentucky and Mississippi State, I think, both of those being at home. Same with Florida. Florida is a difficult team for Tennessee, though. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, though, being at home. Arkansas, I think you beat Kent State and Chattanooga. That puts them at 9-3. I think they could very well border on that tier, but I think they finish in the great tier as well. This is what we talked about, though, when I said, where the SEC is at least this year.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to the Big Ten video because look at that. 7 teams in, and we still, at least in my opinion, everything greaten up.
I was having this discussion the other day with a couple of friends where, we were talking about, okay, who's going to finish in the top half of the SEC, and it's like a team on that borderline of the top half very well may be 7-5, 8-4, right? Like, it may work out that way where there's a log jam. So just because you might finish mid-pack, if you will, in the SEC, that you still might be a solid near top 25 team.
Yeah, so being bad, quote-unquote middle of the pack, a lot of teams would perceive that as, we didn't really have a good year. We got to look at all the competition around you. Everyone's kind of in the same rat race, basically. And that brings us to Oklahoma at 8th. Brent Venables in his 3rd year, 10-3 last year. And Oklahoma and Tennessee, I feel like, are in the same boat, at least in terms of quarterback play. Jackson Arnold, 5-star kid. You want to see how he plays. I think that's the main concern for OU fans. I would say that's one of the big things. You want to see how the offense moves as a unit. Does the offensive line look better? How does the defense look as well? You're going to have great players. Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman. You're going to have great receivers to throw to. Deion Burks is going to be the main highlight of that, the transfer. He'll be fun to watch. But Oklahoma's schedule as well, as it has been noted, is not fun. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. At LSU, Alabama at home, at Missouri, at Ole Miss, Texas. You get Tennessee at home. At Auburn can be a difficult place to play. Tulane's coming off another great season. They're one of those, you should win, but there's that 2% chance in there that Tulane snipes them. Maybe finds a way to get him. It nearly happened in 2021. But this is going to be interesting for Oklahoma to say the least.
Yeah, and, you combine the tough schedule with the fact where the offensive line plus Arnold is, I say, more of a question mark. They're unproven, right? The defense should be legit. Me and you have both talked about it at length off air, where this might be the best defense they've had since possibly Venables was here the first time. That is a legit possibility. But what can that offense do? At times last year, hummed really well, but also was inconsistent. Now with Arnold at the helm, how's he look? Feeling more comfortable knowing he's that guy? Cade, I see good. I see probably 8 wins, given the toughness of the schedule. I've seen models slide them down to 5 wins, because it is that tough of the schedule. I don't think they'll dip below that by any stretch. I think you're looking at an 8-4 OU team with the possibility 9-3. I think 10 wins is going to be very tough to do given the schedule, but 8-9 wins possible, and in my mind, likely.
And, as much as we'd like to talk about, and I've seen,
Put them in a lead tier.
Yeah, as like, once again, as much as I'd like to just say, hey, we're going to go 12-0, get ready, that's not realistic at all.
Yeah.
As much fun as that would be, and I've had conversations with people I know, family and friends and things like that, and even seeing, the amazing range of people online. There's a lot of hype around what Oklahoma can be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what Sooner fans want to see, but we've got to see it first. And I think that's the main thing. That's why, we talked about this even. To me, the big game is Tennessee. That is your tell-all, not just of Oklahoma, the team, but kind of Oklahoma where they want to be now. You could have everything focusing on the move to the SEC the last few years. You get Brent Venables in, you start shifting the culture, you go away from what it was to what it is now. You got the defense back. You've got a blend of offense and defense as well, playing that complementary football. You've got a new offensive coordinator again. If you can beat Tennessee, and especially if you can beat Tennessee and Auburn, that's a pretty positive sign for the season, I would say.
It is, but I would warn in the same sense I talked about Missouri drinking the old Kool-Aid. I think we saw with OU a little bit last year, right? You roll into that Texas game, everybody thought, oh, well, Texas is going to get you because they hadn't really played a tough schedule at that point by any stretch. They won the Texas game, but then after that, they're sipping their Kool-Aid a bit, and you slip up a few places, right?
Yeah.
If you're OU.
And see, that's what I kind of expect. I would not be shocked if Oklahoma's 5-0 going into Red River and finish the year 8-4. It would not shock me one bit. That's where I think, as much as I want to put Oklahoma in great, because I think they can, I want to be more realistic and grounded and put them in good.
Yeah.
I think that's the right move to go to. I think they'll be 8-4, 9-3, kind of right on that line.
And by all indications, I think if you do that with the schedule, that's an excellent first season.
Yes.
And knowing that you are, folks, they're starting true freshmen on their defensive line, and not guys because they need them to start there, like in the couple years past. It's because they're that talented.
Yeah.
Venables has done an excellent job recruiting that side of the ball, as we expected him to, and he has built an embarrassment of riches in that front seven that going forward in the SEC will serve the Sooners very well. Will be maybe a growing pain or two with that.
Yeah, and everything that I've kind of thought of, at least, I think most OU fans would agree that, Dylan Gabriel leaves. This was supposed to be kind of that transition year anyway to what everyone's praying and hoping and begging for in 2025.
Yeah.
You'll get another year Jackson Arnold getting that experience. The defense, you'll lose a lot of key contributors, but you'll start to get that new wave of all Venables guys in there.
Yes.
But if Oklahoma, a lot of OU fans are going to want 10-2. They're going to want, to be in the playoff, and not to say that I don't want to be. Who doesn't want to be? But I think just trying to be a little bit more grounded in reality, I think 8-4, it's not the season you want to have, from a fan base standpoint. But I think looking at it seriously, you take that.
You would, and depending on who the losses are to, you're not going to be in the college football playoff, but you'll be a solid top 20 team in the country.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so that brings us on to number 9, which is Texas A&M. And Texas A&M, they are in an interesting position. Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator there a few years ago. Now he's back as the head man. A&M went 7-6 last year, 4-4 in the SEC. They're going to have some good D linemen. What a surprise. Texas A&M is going to have a lot of talent. Guys like Shamar Turner, Nick Scourton, they're going to have some athletes. They get Notre Dame to start the year. That's a game they're favored in, by the way. Number 7 Notre Dame coming to town and they're favored. That's going to be interesting because Mike Elko going up against his former quarterback, Riley Leonard, who was at Duke last year. He knows how to beat that guy. I think A&M can win that game. I think they will win that game. And then the schedule really opens up for them after that. McNeese at Florida, Bowling Green, Arkansas, and Jerry's World. And then you get Missouri. And that's your next big show-me type of game. If you split Notre Dame and Missouri, you get 5-1. You can easily get 6-0 out of that, I think, if things go the right way. Then you get Mississippi State, LSU, South Carolina, New Mexico State, Auburn on the road, and Texas. I think there's a very real possibility that Texas A&M could find their way into the great tier. I think 9-3 is a possibility, but I also know this is Texas A&M. And Texas A&M has, unfortunately for them, one very true prophecy that always seems to happen. They will always find a way to lose a game or two for absolutely no reason whatsoever that you would not even think twice about. I mean, think about the App State game a few years ago. Games like that, where you go, it'd be funny if they lost that, but there's no way they what do you mean they lost that game? And then they become the national laughingstock of the week.
Yeah, and here's the real hot take. You said great tier. I think given the schedule and given what Texas A&M is hoping the wash away of the Jimbo stink, if you will, they might be able to slip into that elite tier, Cade. I think the pathway very well could open up. I mean, you duck Georgia, you duck Bama. Yeah, you got LSU, but you're at home for that one. Got Texas, but again, you're at home for that one. I would be venturing to say of all these teams, below Georgia and Texas, and this goes above Alabama, Ole Miss, and LSU, Texas A&M might just be the dark horse of it all. I mean, they really might because you've got the potential quarterback in place, got a new head coach who's hungry, guy who's been at the program, knows, hey, we've been through some of those struggles. Let's shuck some of those. And we know the talent's there. The recruiting classes have been there under Jimbo. They just haven't capitalized on them. I like Texas A&M in the great tier and potentially slide to the elite tier.
I'll agree with you on great tier. Not going to agree with you on elite tier. I think they can be great. I think a 9-3 is a legitimate possibility for them. But I don't see them beating LSU. I don't see them beating Texas. Those are big home games, and they're in the probable, but I don't think they will happen. I think Missouri, they might be able to catch them, but I don't think they're going to be in that position yet. I think Texas will come into that game wanting it just as much as A&M does. I think Texas is the more talented team than Texas A&M. LSU, I think they're just one of those they're going to find a way to win no matter what A&M seems to throw at them type of deal. That's just where I find it. So you're just going to stare at me like that. Okay.
Hey, I respect it. I respect it. I get it. I think we all collectively, as college football fans, say, hey, yes, on paper, Texas A&M looks great, but we've seen this story and we've seen this song and dance, and it doesn't come to fruition. This year might be the year it actually does. That's kind of how I'm sneakily feeling about it.
All righty. Well, we'll move on to the final set of Tigers in the SEC. That is Auburn. Second year for Hugh Freeze at the helm there, and Auburn last year 6-7, 3-5 in the SEC. They're going to have good athletes again. They've got Jarquez Hunter at running back. He's going to be phenomenal to watch. But the thing I just cannot get over with Auburn, no matter how much you could talk about how many athletes they've got, how many amazing, talented players they have, which is true, Peyton Thorne is their quarterback. Yeah. And I can't get over that. He's okay.
A guy that career-wise just barely above 60%, usually is less than 2-1 in touchdown-to-pick ratio. And I think what you're getting at is in the SEC, I don't think that cuts it. It's not going to cut the mustard, especially when you're a team that was already 6-6 last year. I don't see where this Auburn team has improved is where I'm at.
Yeah, and I mean, the schedule looks great the first 4 games: Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, and Arkansas. You get all 4 of those at home. You get Oklahoma at home, probably 4-0. That hype's going to start coming, and you're going to think, has Hugh Freeze done it again? Has he turned another program into something?
Right.
And then you get Oklahoma, Georgia to smack you right back into reality. And they could beat Oklahoma. That's one of those, if they come out hyped enough, I can see them winning that game. But I don't think they beat Georgia. And then you got to turn around and play Missouri, and then you get Kentucky on the road, and then Vandy, which, gets you back on track.
And Monroe.
Yeah, Louisiana Monroe. But then you got Texas A&M and Alabama.
Yeah.
Your season can quickly go off the rails if you're Auburn. I'm gonna say that they're probably good tier. I think 7-5. It is technically an improvement, but kind of you expect more.
I'm probably averaging a half. I think somewhere between that 6 and 7 range,
Yeah.
given the non-conference.
Yeah, and it's one of those that with Auburn, I kind of bounce it back and forth because the game that I think about at least with Auburn is that game at Kentucky.
Yeah.
It's going to be a night game in Lexington right after Missouri. I could very well see Auburn winning the first 4 and then losing the next 4.
Right.
And it'd be one of those, then you win 2 and lose 2. It could be, I'm going to talk myself into it. Auburn will be in the average tier. I'll say 6 and 6.
I think they're a bowl-eligible
6.5.
team.
Yeah, they'll make a bowl game. But at the same time, it's just I don't expect a lot of improvement when Peyton Thurin is your quarterback. I'm sorry.
And this would have been a year, we talk about the realignment. This would have been a year had OU and Texas not been in, and you had your divisions and this and that. Maybe you could work your way into a 7-8 win Auburn team, just given what's there. But now with everything on the table, it goes to show the toughness of, the Big Ten, the SEC, of just, man, like your middle to bottom teams. It doesn't get any easier throughout the season, right? You're going to at least run into 3 or 4 games. You're like, man, how do we win these?
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to get into that a lot more because now we've got Kentucky at 11. Mark Stoops, once again, still the coach. Was the coach at A&M for a solid 2 hours before the Texas A&M fan base put it into that rumor. Mark Stoops last year, 7-6, 3-5 in the SEC. If you listen to the Big Ten or watched it, the Big Ten tier list, I'm going to say something that I said a lot then. The talent's there. It's just you got to remind yourself where you're at. You play Georgia. You go to Ole Miss. You go to Tennessee. You go to Texas. Louisville's a big rivalry game. Florida on the road can be a difficult place to play for a team. You could get knocked out by South Carolina early. There's a lot of good that can be there for Kentucky. 7-5 can be doable if one of those games splits your way. But 1 or 2 bad breaks and you're going off the rails into 6-6 or maybe 5-7. I don't think they'll be 5-7. I would say they're kind of in the Auburn situation where I think 6 is probably the right number for them, knowing they could easily get to 7.
Now, here's the thing I will say for Mark Stoops. I think he's proven, we talk about the cachet that Georgia's developed. I think Stoops has developed cachet, say, no matter what the schedule, Kentucky, to me, the floor is 7 wins.
Yeah.
Is it much higher than that? Maybe not. They maybe get to 8 or 9 on a good season. But he's proven enough that, hey, they're talking more within that university. Okay, should we get more resources to the football program, right? Because he's earned it. I mean, they're not necessarily a recruiting dominant team like basketball, and you could argue that in terms of SEC, NIL, and all that, facilities isn't the best, but he finds a way to take guys that fit his system and make it work. And, of course, we talk about quarterbacks all the time. Brock Vanderbilt, what does he have? This is his time to shine, his opportunity to prove that, yes, I can indeed be that guy. Will he do it? If he could do so, again, I could see where this is a 7-8 win Kentucky team. There's a couple games that, they're just not going to be able to get it done on their schedule, but they have surprised us in the past against some of that upper competition. I think of all the teams to pull off those upset wins right in the mid to bottom tier, Kentucky's the one that's got to be able to do it. They've got the track record. So I'll give Mark the benefit and say, no matter what, give me at least good tier.
Yeah, and I mean, Kentucky's one of those where I can see your point. I definitely can. But I just look at, the typical SEC schedule. And I know Mark Stoops is usually a 7-win kind of guy. It's almost he's made his mark there.
Yeah.
But something about it just feels like, you're going to get a South Carolina early. Anything could go haywire in that game, especially with Georgia looming around the corner. You get Florida coming right off, your easy week against Vandy. You got to turn around and go to Florida. And then you get Auburn, Tennessee, something could go haywire there. You could lose to Louisville at the end of the year. I think it's more of a kind of situation with Oklahoma Tennessee. I want to see a little bit of Brock Vandegrift first.
Sure.
I want to see that for now, 6. Easily could be 7.
Disrespecting Big Blue. Got to come after him.
We'll see about that. But the next one is Florida. Florida, the 12-spot Billy Napier, year 3, 5-7 last year. It's still Graham Mertz's time to shine, at least for right now. We'll see what happens, though, with Florida, because this is, talk about the epitome of brutality, Tyler. Talk about Miami and Texas A&M. That's 2 of your first 3 games. Now, granted, you get both at home, but then you've got UCF, which will be a weird game for them to play. At Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State all in a row.
Yeah.
You talk about the November of death, basically.
Whew.
That is, for a Florida team trying to find a way to just get to a bowl game, you could very well have 5 straight losses because you got to go to Texas. You got to go to Florida State. None of that is easy right there. You add Tennessee with it, Texas A&M, and Miami. Just that alone, on paper, if you just said, well, okay, well, they're going to lose to every top 25 team they play, that is 8 losses right there. That is a 4-8 season, just pure paper. I think Florida's able to win at least one of those. But I don't know if they can win more than one of those is the problem.
Yeah. And I think the only chance they got is if somehow, some way, DJ Lagway is able to prove that he's better now than any experience that Graham Mertz has, because you feel from an athletic standpoint, that's a guy that gives you the best shot, knowing you may not have quite the talent you need to surround a guy like Graham Mertz with. I know he's got the experience, but if I'm Billy, I would rather start the youngin', let him roll, and we'll live with the mistakes, because I'm not sure if Mertz has the capability to survive this type of schedule. I mean, it is brutal. And given the fact that they're not a great team, things are a little skinny there in terms of the depth. I think Billy survives this year. I think they wind up in the bad tier. I'm with you. Bad tier, and if the wheels really come off, this could be the worst Florida season we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, so Florida's in an absolute bind, and this one is through no fault of their own. They cannot control this schedule conference-wise. At least.
Oh, it's absolutely through their own fault, because they've continually made bad decisions when it comes to coaches.
Well, I mean the schedule part at least.
Well,
you can't.
If you got a better coach, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean that's also true. But at the same time, I think Florida is in a position where I think they are what I'd call bad plus. They can win one. I think they can go 1-7 against the top 25. I'll give them one. You're still not making a bowl game, Florida. I'll give them one, but they are clearly the weakest of the 3 here.
Apologize to Kentucky right now for putting Florida in the same tier.
Kentucky is,
how dare you?
Kentucky 6-6, Florida 5-7. That's the way the tiers work, Tyler. That is how that's going to work. Florida might, and that's the thing that I've heard is Florida could be a talented team. They could have more talent than Auburn and Kentucky. It's not going to matter.
Well, they should on paper.
And they should, on paper. But we get to the bottom few now here in the SEC, really getting to the end of it. We move on to South Carolina. South Carolina, coached by Shane Beamer, still in his 4th year. South Carolina 5-7 last year. They've got some fun players. They've got Raheem Sanders, transferred over from Arkansas. I'm intrigued to see how he does. They've got a lot of good defense players, guys like Debo Williams, Tonka Hemingway. What a name, Tonka Hemingway. Talk about, again, all-name team.
All-name team.
South Carolina's schedule, you go to Kentucky early. You get LSU. You got Ole Miss, Alabama on the road, Oklahoma on the road, all on the road, Texas A&M, Missouri, at Clemson. You got a lot of struggling going on here. Again, just an absolute brutal schedule for South Carolina.
It is, and you look to the quarterback room, as much as it's crazy to say, Spencer Rattler at least brought some consistency there. Did he have great games all the time? No, but he wasn't terrible, and I just don't know. Lenore Sellers is the guy that's named there. 6'3", 244, hadn't really seen a lot of time. Freshman. So you got to give Coach Beamer at least the credit there. Kind of what we're urging Coach Napier to do is, hey, go with the young, throw them into the fire. Give yourself the best chance from an athletic standpoint. I don't think it's going to improve much unless he just comes in and is absolutely game-breaking. Boy, it's an uphill battle. It is an uphill battle in this conference.
It absolutely is. And I see South Carolina kind of the exact same way I see Florida. I think it really doesn't matter how much talent they have.
Yeah.
I think they're in that bad plus tier with Florida. Probably a 4 or 5 win team. You get maybe a sneaky win here and there. You could, if you're lucky, get to bowl eligibility. But I think 5 and 7 for them once again. And it just turns into, what do we do now type of deal. It's a hard time in the SEC. Same with the Big Ten. We talked about it where, any of these teams really in this average tier here, some of them weighed down by their schedule more than others. Some of it, they've brought on themselves. Some of it hasn't. I
think so far OU is a very good dividing line because I think OU is the one team where you say, okay, don't know if 9 and 10 wins is necessarily quite in reach, but they're better than the teams below them, maybe not quite as good as the teams above, even though some of those teams above likely to wind up in the good tier, right? So OU might just be that perfect dividing line this year, matching their 8th ranking.
They very well might be. We will have to see, though, because Arkansas is the next team up. Arkansas last year 4-8, only one conference win. Not a whole lot going on at Arkansas. A lot of people want Sam Pittman, who's in his 5th year now, fired last year. I don't mean to, be too negative. Usually I try to offer,
sure,
something, but this just feels like a lame duck year that should not be happening, at least in my opinion, that, you look at the schedule at Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, of course, at Arlington, at Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, at Missouri. I mean, you count up the ranked teams there, you're taking on 7 ranked teams this year.
Yeah.
And none of those really, at least to me, feels super winnable. Those are all going to be way uphill battles.
It is. And, I think Sam Pittman is a guy that personality-wise fits what you'd want in an SEC coach. The problem he's had is that recruiting-wise, knowing, okay, we're not going to be able to draw all the big 5-star guys, right? You might be able to hit on some high 4 stars here or there, depending on the geography of some of those dudes. But when you go for those guys, they have to produce at a high level, and it just hadn't happened. Some of them have, some of them have fizzled out. Transfer portal hadn't helped, and it just quite hasn't all come together. So, and I think the fans are right. Probably should have got rid of them at the end of last year. Fresh start, move on, especially with the new look SEC. And, the lame duck, that kind of feels like the right description because it'll probably be more of the same and come with a result that should have happened a year before.
Yeah, and with Arkansas, they're the first team in the bad tier.
Yeah.
If they win 5 games, that would almost be a miracle in and of itself.
Right.
And, and I don't mean that there's no other way to put that other than bad. But it's just okay. It's where Arkansas
just bad.
is.
That's where they're at.
I'd like to offer a little bit more positivity to a fan base that's not seen it in a while for football. It's been a few years, but you got basketball. You got Coach Cal at Arkansas, Dad. That's your trade-off, I guess.
Well, and that is the one thing about Arkansas you could say on the positive note. That fan base is rabid, right? And if they could just tap into that from a donor standpoint to help with that NIL, help with maybe some of those facilities that may need it, and just the overall spirit, that could get you back on top quickly. We've seen Arkansas do it. They've kind of surprised people in the past at times, and things come together. But right now, it's just not at that point.
No, I mean, that brings us to Mississippi State. Mississippi State, kind of the opposites, but same situation, I guess is the best way to put it. That, not a whole lot of talent going on there, but instead of, 2 weird seasons in a row, one where you had the tragedy of Mike Leach passing away, you get not a whole new coaching staff, but you kind of try to slap everything together, see what works, see what doesn't. You got a mesh of systems going on, guys built for an air raid scheme, not playing air raid football as much. Now it's Jeff Lebby's time. New head coach now. You look at the first 3 games, Eastern Kentucky, at Arizona State, Toledo, all three are winnable. Those are games you should come out 3-0, but then you get into conference play, and you get Florida at home, and then it's Texas on the road, Georgia on the road, Texas A&M, Arkansas, UMass, and then at Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss to end the season. So, I mean, rough at the end, to say the absolute least.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit higher, I guess, on Mississippi State than I am Arkansas. I think they belong in the same tier, but with Lebby there, maybe a little bit more renewed passion. You mentioned kind of some of the struggles over the last couple of years as you have the Mike Leach strategy and figure out how to work out of that going forward. Lebby kind of gives you that fresh start, right? And if you can bring some of that more enthusiasm, again, Mississippi State as a program has been good about being able to maximize the talent they've had there. I think they wind up in the bad tier, but I could see a world where maybe they just kind of get into that average tier by way of, a few breaks here or there.
And that's what I see from Mississippi State. They're another bad plus to me. Their non-conference schedule alone gets them 4 wins. I mean, Eastern Kentucky, UMass, Toledo. You pick one of Arkansas or Florida, you're at 4. You win both of those.
But you could also see a world where they lose.
You could
both
also
of
say,
those.
a world where they go through.
Yeah.
But I'll put them in that same kind of Florida, South Carolina tier where I could see them, easily falling down. But I'll be generous, say, Jeff Lebby gets a little bit more into the program. If you can just stop running jet sweeps, still be in a lovely place. I'm sorry. Sorry, Mississippi State fans in advance. If you don't like jet sweeps, you're probably going to see a lot of them at the worst times.
They don't call him Jet Lebby for nothing, baby.
That is true. That is unfortunately true. But we've reached the end. We're at everyone's second favorite SEC team, depending on who they're playing that day. If they're playing your rival, you absolutely love them. If you're playing them in baseball, you absolutely despise them because of the Whistler. We're talking about Vanderbilt. 2-10 last year. Clark Lee's in his 4th year. Vanderbilt was 0-8 in SEC plays. All I have in my notes is the word ow. Because they start the year with Virginia Tech. You got Missouri, Alabama, Texas, at LSU, Tennessee. They've got Ball State and Alcorn State and Georgia State. Those are your 3 games. If you can win all 3 of those and escape bad tier, I'll be proud of them. They might actually lose at Georgia State for all I know. And I don't mean that even to be super negative. That's just how I feel about Vanderbilt.
Yeah, they're just, you talk about a perfect storm of not really having the tools to adapt to the new age college football. They're one of the highest academic, reasons the SEC's got some standing to that tough academic school. They're not going to have the NIL behind them. And they're not really established even among, relatively peers in the bad to average tier where they can pull in some of those recruits. So they just don't have any of the pieces to work with there. They find a way to do it in baseball, but for some reason they can't get it clicking in football. So for now, bad tier. You hope they don't slip to the horrible tier again, but who knows?
Yeah, I will give them the benefit of the doubt, put them in bad tier, and there you go. 3-win Vandy, but I don't think they win a conference game.
Yeah.
I think you get Alcorn, you get Georgia State, you get Ball State. That's all you're getting. Which, of course, they could shock everyone and beat Virginia Tech, but that's tall enough order as it is.
Yeah.
We'll get to Virginia Tech when we talk about the ACC preview. Some people hyping them up, some people not. But either way, you look at the SEC there, and you mentioned it, Tyler. You're pretty spot on with it. Oklahoma is the dividing line. You were either above Oklahoma or you were below Oklahoma. That is a pretty good way to separate the SEC this year. You are one of the two. If you're above them, you're going to be great, maybe even elite. If you're below them, you're average or bad. There's just no other way to say it.
Yeah, because I think Oklahoma's that quintessential team that's, okay, you could go win 8 or 9, but there's probably not a chance you're competing for the SEC title. And again, if you're in the mix with them, you're in that same boat. If you're below them, you probably, we're down a rung or 2 on the season. But, Cade, who do you have taken the SEC championship?
Georgia. Pretty simple.
Pretty simple, he says.
Pretty simple.
Go Dogs.
I think it's going to be Georgia. I can see Texas winning it. I just don't think they're going to. I will say, I will give Texas one thing. History does not repeat itself often. But when Texas moved to the Big 12, they won the last Southwest Conference championship. They won the first Big 12 championship. They won the last Big 12 championship. Now here they are in the SEC, but they're not beating Georgia twice. If they beat Georgia the first time to even get them in this situation, which I don't know. They might not. We'll see what they do with that back-to-back stretch. I think Georgia would get them the second time, especially in Atlanta. It'd be a home game for Georgia.
Right.
You're not beating Georgia in Atlanta unless you're Alabama.
You know who is beat Georgia twice? Give me the Crimson Tide. Kalen DeBoer shocks the world, gets it done in the first season. He beats Georgia.
There you go. So the split there, and I mean that's kind of the beauty of it. Any of those, I'm not going to say every great team looking at you, Texas A&M, but we disagree on that. But I think the SEC, kind of what you always expect from it. You got your great teams, you got your elite teams, you got one good, and then you just kind of have that hodgepodge of average to bad. Kind of, same thing we saw with the Big Ten. A lot of varying around, but usually that same tier mark. But folks, as always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. And until next time, have a good one, everybody.